Hi guys, welcome back to Politically Correct. This is the first episode of Debunking Conservatives. Now, let me say a few words about this new series. We, in my view, are going to debunk conservatives' ideas, and we're going to point out the contradictions about those pathological liars. Thank you so much about the question. So, of course, in this series, we're going to debunk their nonsense, and we're going to point out where they're wrong and all that kind of stuff. And this is the first episode, and I hope it will be followed by billions and billions and billions of other videos, because it's fun, guys. It's fun to debunk nonsense, especially conservative nonsense, and because they're full of it. And so, let's start, guys. Let's start. So, the myth of the Judeo-Christian values. So, I know a lot of you, heard some conservative dude talking about how our America and the Western civilization is so good because it's founded on Judeo-Christian values. These Judeo-Christian values that any conservative brings in, but never explain what are those values. You hear Ben Shapiro that said, America is founded on Judeo-Christian values, and everyone that says the opposite is factually incorrect, affects don't care about your feelings. Or you heard from, Charlie Kirk or Milo Yiannopoulos, do you remember him? On, the Joe Rogan podcast, when he said, our culture, I think that our culture is inherently better than all the other culture. Can we agree on that? Yeah. And I think that our culture is better because it's founded on Judeo-Christian values. Our culture is founded on Judeo-Christian values, and that's just a fact. I won't say what those values are because, it's not true. It's not true that America and Western civilization is founded on Judeo-Christian values, and it's just a myth. It's just a myth. And in fact, this episode is the myth of the Judeo-Christian values. So let's start debunking this nonsense. So there are two interpretations. I come up with two interpretations of this myth because, conservatives never really do definitions. They never give definitions about this topic. And so I did their own job, so to define what they actually mean. And so I come out with the interpretation, and I think those are the closest one to their belief. So the first interpretation is the fact that Judeo-Christian values are values historically promoted by the church, the religion, and generally clerical institutions. And if that is the case, that's just flat out wrong. I mean, America and, Europe are not founded on those values. In fact, Western civilization developed when people embraced secularism and started to get away from religion and clerical power and institution. This movement is called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is a philosophical movement developed in the 18th century with the intent to refute any kind of dogma and religious beliefs. So Enlightenment philosophers were guided by the light of reason. Reason was, the light in the darkness that the church created through persecutions, inquisitions, and repressions. And during this age were promoted ideals like tolerance, freedom, and peace. So in this period, we had people like Locke that understood that a good government needs to separate the powers. We had people like, for example, Spinoza that developed thoughts like tolerance and, peace from the assumption that we're all born equally. People like Cesare Beccaria, that's one of us, Italian dude, we're the best. I know, guys. Actually, Italy is number one. We all know. joking aside, we had people like Cesare Beccaria that understood that, torture is bad and counterproductive, and a state, in order to function, needs a system built on fair process. We had Montesquieu, that was an advocate for democracy, and also movements in 1848 that were movements, that were founded on Enlightenment values. So it was like a political legacy of the Enlightenment values. And these movements in the 1848 advocated for things like, fair elections, decent conditions for workers, democracy, representation in parliament, and so on. I mean, those are things that we give for granted right now. And these people that fought for the liberties and the rights that we have right now were criticized by conservatives, the religious people, and they were seen as radical. Who else is called a radical by conservatives and religious people? I really can't come up with the name right now. The liberties and rights that we have right now come from that period, come from that mentality and from that age. When religion instead was in charge, they ruined progress, they were anti-science, they persecuted people for their beliefs, and they did also crusades. And by the way, the crusades are the example of how history repeats itself. Because, the excuses of crusaders were like, oh, we have to export our beliefs and our values. I mean, I can't recall the people that think in that way, that we have to go in other countries and export democracy and all that stuff. I really can't understand. I can't remember who those people are. So if this is the first interpretation, if the first interpretation is correct, so that we're built on Judeo-Christian values, so like middle-aged values, then this is just flat out wrong, because as I just explained, Western civilization, as we know it right now, developed when we separated ourselves from the church and clerical institutions. But, to be fair, a probably better interpretation could be this one. Judeo-Christian values means values promoted by Jesus or the prophets of Judaism. That's half correct and half wrong. Let me explain why. So, in fact, as I said, most of our rights and principles come from the Enlightenment and the 19th century. So, our principles are like a mix of Enlightenment and Romantic philosophy. But it's also true that we have values like Christian values, And I'm talking about Christian particularly because the only value that I know from Judaism is essentially an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That isn't that bad as a value, because it promotes, that the punishment should be equally proportioned to the crime committed. It's also true that most of the times this principle is used to justify something like the death penalty, and I'm deeply against the death penalty. And so I digress a little bit. So yes, in our society we have values like empathy, compassion, tolerance, peace, and equality. But guess what? Conservatives are not following this shit at all. On most issues, on a lot of issues, conservatives would be against what Jesus Christ would say. They're against what Jesus Christ would say. So for example, let's say foreign policy. Do you think Jesus Christ would like US foreign policy? Do you think Jesus Christ would like to increase the military spending like conservatives want? And also, do you think it'd like the regime changes going on in the world? Or do you think it'd be, in favor of the death penalty or prisons generally? Now, some of Jesus' positions are too far gone. Like, he was against prisons and punishing, because he was the dude saying that, slap me in my face, I'll show you the other cheek. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of that. But leftists would like a prison system based on rehabilitation, conservatives on punishment. Who do you think is closer to Jesus' beliefs? Or do you think Jesus was in favor of individualism or low taxes on the rich? He said that the rich should give everything they have to the poor. Who's against redistribution of wealth? Conservatives. On immigration, do you have to say anything about it? Do you think Jesus would like the Muslim ban? On every major issue, leftists are closer to Jesus' beliefs. Even on secularism, Jesus was a strong secularist. Now, I won't say that all conservatives are against secularism, but if you're against secularism, trust me, you're not a leftist. You're more probably a conservative. So, this thing of America founded on Judeo-Christian values is just a myth. Most of the values that we have right now come from enlightenment and the political legacy that they have left. And even on values that we share with Jesus Christ, we have a more practical versions of those values, and conservatives are not following it. Our liberals and leftists, they really believe in those values. I mean, guys, overall, Jesus was a revolutionary guy, full of compassion. Who's the other guy that speaks about revolution and wants to be remembered with the word compassion? So, guys, that's it. We're done. We're done debunking this nonsense of the Judeo-Christian values. And it's pretty fun. As I said, it's pretty fun to debunk conservative nonsense. That's one of those. And, I know that there are still some grammar mistakes, but let me tell you guys, they will disappear like a miracle. Someday they will disappear and the line will go below zero. Let me tell you guys, they will go below zero. And it's gonna be a miracle. It's gonna be a miracle. It's gonna be tremendous. It's gonna be fantastic. So I hope you enjoyed, and see you next video, guys.